I remember the day I received the email as clearly as if it were painted across the sky in blazing letters. I was in a hotel room on the outskirts of Tokyo, halfway through a crucial business trip that had already drained most of my energy. When the notification pinged on my phone, I thought it was just another corporate message or a reminder about my flight schedule. But the subject line read, "We're so sorry." My heart skipped a beat because I never got apologies from my parents. They were not the apologizing type. They were the type that insisted their decisions were always correct, their judgments infallible. And so I opened the email, bracing myself for whatever family drama was about to explode onto my screen. In seconds, my world turned upside down. They had sold my beloved seaside villa without a word of warning to cover debts. Before I left for Tokyo, I had locked up the villa with my own two hands, turning each key in each lock and carefully storing away the precious memories I had accumulated there. That house by the ocean was my safe haven, my retreat from the chaos of an otherwise relentless world. It belonged to me alone, purchased with the hard-earned money I'd saved over years of grueling work. My parents had no legal claim over it. I still recall the day I first saw that property, the gentle curve of the shoreline, the salty breeze wafting through open windows, and the sense of absolute freedom that washed over me whenever I heard the waves crash. Now, reading that email, I felt like all that serenity had been shattered in a single, merciless blow. The villa, once my personal sanctuary, had apparently become a bargaining chip for my sister's debts. They claimed it was necessary to save the family name, to prevent the shame of my sister's creditors knocking at our door. But what about my shame, my sense of violation? I stared at the screen, rereading the lines until they blurred. You didn't really need it anyway, right? To them, my villa was just a convenience, an expendable asset they could sacrifice at will. I felt anger burning at the back of my throat, a bitter tang that made it hard to swallow. Instead of replying, instead of screaming via email, I booked the next flight home. I couldn't finalize the rest of my work, not with this betrayal rattling inside my head. By the time I landed, my fury had morphed into a cold, sharp determination. I would not let them get away with this. They expected me to accept their betrayal quietly, but they were very wrong. My first stop wasn't my parents' house, but the local police station. I walked in feeling like my veins were filled with ice, refusing to let my emotions show on my face. I'd always believed in respecting my elders, in keeping family matters private. But that belief had just been shattered along with my trust. Sitting down with an officer, I calmly explained the situation. My property had been sold without my consent. He listened intently, his eyes flicking with concern when I mentioned my sister's gambling debts. I had proof of ownership. I had emails. I had everything I needed to establish that this sale was a criminal act if my signature was forged or my identity misrepresented. The officer took notes, nodding and assuring me they would open an investigation into the sale. As I left, I felt a grim satisfaction. I was finally taking action, no mercy. When I finally walked into my parents' living room, they were huddled together on the couch, looking both anxious and defensive. My mother sprang up, eyes watering with what I assumed was a performance rather than genuine remorse. "We had no choice," she insisted, her voice wavering in an attempt to elicit sympathy. My father sat quietly, a stern expression on his face, arms folded across his chest. I realized in that moment that I had no tears left to shed for them. Their betrayal was complete, and so was my resolve. Rather than yelling, I simply informed them that I had reported the unauthorized sale to the police. The color drained from their faces, especially when I mentioned the potential criminal charges for fraud. They gaped at me as though I were a stranger, but I felt no pang of regret. My decision was made, and justice would follow. My sister was noticeably absent, likely holed up somewhere, trying to gamble her way out of the mess. I learned from a cousin that she had racked up debts in multiple casinos across the country, borrowing money from all the wrong people. None of that excused my parents' actions. I left their house with a cold civility, ignoring my mother's pleading calls for me to be reasonable. The next day, I met with a lawyer who specialized in real estate disputes. He confirmed what I already suspected. If my parents forged my signature or falsely represented themselves as owners, they were in deep trouble. The best part was that I held the original title, complete with official stamps, safely locked away in my personal safe at my downtown apartment. No one had expected me to keep that. My meticulous nature was about to become their downfall, and I relished it. A few days later, I received a call from the real estate agent who had handled the sale. He sounded uneasy, probably having discovered some irregularities in the paperwork. I agreed to meet him in his office, a sleek glass building overlooking the harbor. Walking in, I felt the tension in the air. He offered me a seat, nervously tapping a stack of documents on his desk. When he started talking, I could tell he was trying to protect himself from legal fallout. He admitted that he never once met me or spoke to me during the sale, despite my supposed presence at every stage of the transaction. I let him talk, quietly noting every detail: forged IDs, suspicious signatures, and even a laughable attempt at mimicking my writing style. His confession was all I needed to confirm the fraud, and I saw the panic in his eyes grow palpable. He tried to shift the blame onto my parents and sister, claiming he'd simply been told that I was busy but fully on board. I offered no comfort, no absolution. I informed him that I had already gone to the police and his involvement would likely be scrutinized. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and he stammered about not wanting to go to jail. That's when he revealed the twist. He had a secret recording of a phone call with my parents. In it, my parents explicitly admitted to forging my name to expedite the sale and pay off my sister's debts. He had kept it as insurance, just in case things went sour. Now he saw an opportunity to protect himself by handing it over, hoping I'd spare him from the worst. I took the recording, my face impassive, but inside I felt a vindictive satisfaction stirring like a storm. Armed with this recording, I returned to the police station, this time meeting the detective assigned to my case. He listened to the audio, eyebrows shooting up at the blatant confession. Any lingering doubt about my parents' role vanished in an instant. They had conspired to commit fraud, and my sister was their accomplice, whether directly or indirectly. The detective thanked me, promising to expedite the investigation. A new wave of emotions washed over me, but pity was not among them. I remembered every slight, every dismissive comment, every time they'd taken me for granted. This time, I refused to be the dutiful child they expected. Instead of stifling my anger, I let it guide me, fueling every step I took toward holding them accountable for their betrayal. No more looking away, no more begging for scraps of respect. My retribution would be as cold and precise as a scalpel. Word spread quickly in our small community. Neighbors began whispering about how I dared to take legal action against my own family. Some of them were shocked, others oddly supportive, but I noticed how few actually condemned my parents' betrayal. It was as if they found it normal to sacrifice one child's property for another's mistakes. That twisted moral code only strengthened my resolve to see this through. I hired an additional attorney, one experienced in criminal law, to press charges more aggressively. He assured me that with the recording in hand, conviction was highly likely. My parents tried calling me repeatedly, leaving frantic voicemails asking me to think of the family reputation. The irony was not lost on me. They hadn't considered my reputation when they stole my villa, though. Their pleas fell on deaf ears, drowned by the memory of what they did, and I felt no remorse. The day came when the police finally arrived at my parents' doorstep with warrants in hand. My father, usually stoic, was caught off guard, protesting that this was all a misunderstanding. My mother sobbed dramatically, insisting she only wanted to help my sister and never meant to harm me. The officers were unmoved. Forging legal documents and committing fraud were serious offenses, and they escorted my parents away. A neighbor recorded the arrest on her phone, and soon it was circulating on social media. I watched the footage once, feeling no need to gloat, but also no guilt. They had made their choices. Now they'd face the consequences. Inside me, a sense of justice flickered like a steady flame, unwavering and cold. I remembered their assurances that I wouldn't dare oppose them. How wrong they were. My heart was hardened against them, unyielding in its resolve, and I welcomed that. With my parents under arrest, my sister emerged from hiding. She showed up at my door, eyes bloodshot, reeking of stale cigarettes and desperation. There was no apology on her lips, just self-pity as she explained how she never asked them to sell my villa. She claimed she was the victim of manipulative loan sharks and insisted she was powerless against our parents' decision. I let her talk, but her words fell flat. She had always leaned on the family, expecting everyone to bail her out whenever her gambling spiraled out of control. This time, I told her there would be no rescue. I informed her that I had no interest in paying off her debts or helping her avoid the fallout of her own reckless behavior. The emptiness in her gaze revealed her disbelief, but I stood firm. My decision was final. I owed her nothing but my contempt. Over the following weeks, the legal proceedings moved forward with surprising speed. My parents were charged with fraud, and the evidence against them was overwhelming. Their lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, emphasizing their age and lack of prior offenses. The prosecutor wasn't having it, not with clear intent and recorded admissions. Meanwhile, I pursued a civil lawsuit to void the sale entirely and reclaim my property. The real estate agent cooperated with both the police and my legal team, providing every scrap of evidence to confirm the sale's illegitimacy. The buyer, some wealthy businessman, tried to sue me, claiming he had purchased the villa in good faith. But once he learned of the forged documents, he refocused his wrath on the agent and my parents instead. I felt no remorse for his inconvenience. He should have verified everything. A fraudulent sale doesn't excuse careless buyers from facing their own dilemmas. Eventually, the courts ruled in my favor, nullifying the sale and restoring ownership of the villa to me. My parents' criminal trial proceeded, and the judge showed little sympathy for their claims of desperation. The recorded confession weighed heavily against them, as did the blatant forging of my signature. They received a prison sentence, albeit not a particularly long one, but it was enough to mark them with a criminal record. When I heard the verdict, I felt an odd calm settle over me. I wasn't jumping for joy or cackling at their downfall. I simply felt justified. They had tried to take everything from me, and they failed. Even so, I knew the damage they had inflicted would take years to fully repair. Trust is fragile. Once shattered, even the best glue won't mend it completely. They had carelessly broken ours, and I refused to pretend otherwise ever again. My sister vanished once more, likely to avoid her creditors and the scandal that now tainted our family name. I heard rumors she'd fled to another state, where the casinos hadn't blacklisted her yet. As far as I was concerned, she could stay gone. Without her chaotic influence, I found a strange peace settling over my life. I returned to work, re-immersing myself in the projects I'd left unfinished in Tokyo. The company welcomed me back, somewhat wary of the personal drama, but grateful for my expertise. Despite the turmoil, I had delivered results in the past, and they had confidence I would do so again. When I walked into the seaside villa for the first time since the legal victory, I felt a surge of relief. The scent of salt water and the roar of waves welcomed me home. This was mine again, untouched by their deceit or desperate schemes. The walls still bore faint shadows of the art I'd once hung, and the echoes of laughter lingered from better days. I could almost see my younger self, carefree and unburdened, strolling barefoot across the wooden floors. It felt like reuniting with a lost part of me, reclaiming both my space and my sense of self. I spent hours cleaning, rearranging furniture, and opening windows to let fresh air sweep away any lingering negativity. The villa stood resilient, much like I had become. A storm of betrayal had raged, but neither of us had fallen. In a quiet moment, I found a framed photograph of me. My parents and my sister, all smiling on the beach. I tucked it away in a drawer, unable to look at those faces without recalling the price they'd made me pay. There was no forgiveness left in me, the certainty that I deserved better. With each passing day, life settled into a new rhythm. I threw myself into work, finalizing international contracts and brainstorming with colleagues who respected my determination. I reconnected with friends who had worried about me during the ordeal, reassuring them that I was fine, truly fine. The villa became my weekend retreat, a place where I could host small gatherings or simply sit on the balcony and watch the tide roll in. Sometimes, late at night, I caught myself thinking about my parents in prison. But then I remembered the email they had sent, the cold words dismissing my right to my own home. That hardened my resolve once more, quelling any stirrings of misplaced compassion. I had won my life back, and no guilt would poison that victory now. Each day reminded me of my strength and renewed clarity. I had survived betrayal and come out even stronger than before. Months passed, and my parents' sentencing hearing approached. They had attempted to appeal, but the court stood firm. On the day of the hearing, I was given a chance to speak. I walked into the courtroom, my footsteps echoing off polished floors. My parents turned to look at me, their eyes filled with silent pleas. I said nothing to them, only offering my statement to the judge. that I wanted justice upheld, no leniency. When I finished, the judge pronounced the final sentence, affirming a term of imprisonment and mandatory restitution to me for legal fees. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a definitive closure on their betrayal. They had gambled with my home, my trust, and my future. The price for that recklessness now came due, irrevocably. No apologies or crocodile tears could erase the betrayal. Justice demanded they pay the full cost, and so they would. Outside the courthouse, reporters hovered, eager to document the sensational family scandal. I offered no interviews, walking past them with my head held high. This wasn't a moment for public commentary. It was a private conclusion to a deeply personal crime. Back at the villa, I sat on the porch, gazing at the ocean as dusk settled. A sense of finality accompanied the gentle crash of waves against the shore. For years, I had believed family loyalty was unbreakable, that any rift could be healed with enough understanding. Now, I understood that some lines, once crossed, should never be redrawn. Closing my eyes, I breathed in the salty air, letting it cleanse the last vestiges of pity from my heart. I was no longer the naive child craving parental approval. I was my own fortress. Betray me once, and you lose me forever. I had proved that beyond doubt now. In the following months, I renovated the villa, painting walls and replacing old furnishings. I even started a small art collection, displaying pieces that resonated with resilience and self-discovery. Each item I added told a story of survival, reminding me how I reclaimed what was mine. My business trip overseas eventually concluded successfully, and new opportunities opened up, further solidifying my independence. I cut off contact with my parents entirely, refusing any prison visits or letters. The world might judge me as harsh, but they didn't live in my skin, bearing the scars of betrayal. One quiet evening, I stood on the balcony, the sun dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues. I smiled for the first time in a while, savoring the peace I fought so hard to secure. My heart felt lighter than it had in years. At last, I was free and truly unafraid.